Good evening, my friends. Today I want to read to you my absolute favorite passage in the entire Bible. Now, if you know me, I will go, oh, that's one of my favorite passages for a large number of scripture passages. Hello, Bean. But for real, this is my absolute favorite because it really encapsulates the absurd inclusivity of God's vision for creation, and the way that God pushes us to constantly draw the circle wider and reimagine who we think belongs within our communities and within God's community. Now, there are a lot of places in the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, and the Bible in general, that do indeed contradict with each other in that they're written by different human authors who have different interpretations of God's will for their people. And so in the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, we see a lot of places where the authors have determined that God doesn't want certain people to be allowed within the temple walls, within certain parts of the temple to serve as priests, and so on. For instance, we know women can't serve as priests. Persons with most kinds of disabilities were also not allowed to serve as priests, and many of them were not allowed into the deepest, most holy parts of the temple. And same went for foreigners. Depending on where you look in the Hebrew Bible, you will find rules that say that foreigners are not allowed in certain parts of the temple, and same with eunuchs. And yet, you will find so many other parts in Scripture where, for instance, foreigners graft themselves onto God's people. You'll find that in the book of Exodus. You'll find it in Joshua with Rahab, right? Who grafts herself onto the people. You'll find it in the book of Ruth where the same thing goes on. And you'll find so many stories of eunuchs being heroes. The eunuchs of the book of Esther are instrumental to her ability to save her people, for instance. But you'll again find passages, for instance, let's fast forward to the parts of the Bible of the Old Testament that take place after the exile of God's people, after empires have swept in and scattered the people across the nations. A lot of the Jewish people have married foreigners in the lands that they were exiled to, and then they brought those foreigners home. And Ezra and Nehemiah are very concerned with, well, what do we do with them? Do we let them stay? And the author of Isaiah 56 is also responding to that question and responds very faithfully because it is after experiencing the trauma of exile and knowing what it is, again, like their ancestors who were enslaved in Egypt, these exiles have come to know intimately the heart of the stranger. They know what it is to be a foreigner. And many of them know what it is to be a eunuch because a lot of them in exile were castrated, were made into eunuchs in these foreign lands. And so the question of, oh, well, now we're not going to let them. They've endured the trauma of exile and being away from the temple, and now when they come home, we say oh, you're a eunuch now. You're not allowed in our temple or to be among our people anymore. And so Isaiah, the author of Isaiah 56, is one whose heart has been broken open by this trauma. And it has been broken open in a way that allows him to receive words from God that maybe he wouldn't have been able to receive otherwise. He wouldn't have been responsive to them. But now he is. Now he's ready to hear this challenging word that says this. Let not the immigrant's child, who has grafted themselves to the living God, say, the living God will sever, will cut me off from their people. Nor let the eunuch say, look, I am a dried up tree. For thus says the living God, to the eunuchs who safeguard my Sabbaths, and choose what delights me, and hold fast to my covenant, I will give them in my house and within my walls a monument and a name better than sons and daughters that shall not be cut off. And the children of immigrants who graft themselves to the living one, serving them and loving the name of the living one, becoming their servants, each one who safeguards Sabbath from defiling and holds fast my covenant, I will bring them to my holy mountain and make them glad in the house of my prayer. Their offerings and their sacrifices will find acceptance on my altar. For my house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations. So says the Lord, the living God, who is gathering the outcasts of Israel. Still more will I gather to them beyond those already gathered. Oh, my friends, that last verse, that promise from God that she is gathering still others, brings me so much hope and joy. And it should bring hope and joy to all of those who, in various times and places, have been told that they don't belong in God's community, that they don't belong in human communities. Foreigners, yes, immigrants, also the LGBT communities, the disabled communities, various communities of color across time who have been told they are less than human. Incarcerated persons who are told that they are beyond saving, that they don't belong in our communities anymore. I think, for example, of non-Christians, those who are not Christian, and who are often told that because they're not Christian, they don't belong in certain communities, that they are not going to heaven, that they are not saved, and all these other hateful things that we Christians are guilty of saying to them or assuming about them. And Barbara Brown Taylor speaks into that situation. The Christian tendency to think that we are the only correct ones, that we are the only children of God. So I want to close with a passage from her book, Holy Envy, Finding God in the Faiths of Others, where she talks about a passage from the New Testament, from the Gospels, where Jesus speaks of how he is the shepherd. And again, with shepherds, we have this image of gathering, right? God, the shepherd, gathers still others into the flock that we think only belongs to us. I have other sheep that do not belong to this fold. That is something else Jesus says in John's Gospel. He does not elaborate, but I like to imagine the God of many sheep, many folds, many favorites, many mansions. This is how far my holy envy has brought me. From fearing that Jesus will be mad at me for smelling other people's roses, aka finding something beautiful within their faiths and traditions, to trusting that Jesus is the way that embraces all ways. Because there is only one of me, I can only walk one way at a time, but that does not prevent me from believing that other people might be walking their ways with equal devotion and goodwill. Good night, everyone.